The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you on behalf of IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. Our guest today, Jacob Cooper, had an NDE hugely impacting his future life when he was only 3 years old. As he has written, death, even for a moment, changes everything. Today, Jacob is a clinical social worker, certified reiki master, and a certified hypnotherapist with a specialization in past life regression therapy. Jacob lives on Long Island, where he works with clients on a private basis and also through online services. Jake Cooper facilitates spiritual awareness and empowerment seminars influenced by his profound NDE and other transformative past experiences. He's the author of the book Life After Breath, newly published by Waterside Productions. Jake, welcome to NDE Radio.
An honor to be here with you. Thank you so much for having me on as an honored guest.
Well, it's wonderful to have you, Jake. Jake, before we start discussing your NDE, I wanted to ask, I gather you were raised in an Orthodox Jewish tradition, and I was wondering if you could tell us in that tradition or what that tradition has to say about things like, personal mystical experiences such as near-death experience.
What I could say is, most religions started with spirituality. By spirituality, to me at least, that means one's direct personal experience. I think what happens is that gets lost in a collective ideological belief system, where it becomes a bit of a power and control element to it, throughout time. But if you look at the core elements of mostly any major religions at the core, there's mystical practices. And Judaism is no different. If you look at Jewish traditions, obviously Kabbalistic traditions, which, a lot of occult practices are originated from, whether that be the Tarot, and stuff like that.
Yes.
So there's deep mysticism in it, but I always say spirituality exists not because of religion, but despite of it. And, and the same thing with the afterlife and the same thing with God. And that's just my personal viewpoint. But it was more of the dogmatic kind of practice and rule regimented that had me a little bit turned off from it from a pretty young age. But there's a lot of beauty in it, absolutely, as well, too.
Well, coming at that from being raised Catholic, I can understand completely what you're saying about organized religion. You say in your book you suffered from terrifying dreams when you were young. What were they about?
Well, even at the age of 3, prior to my near-death experience, I had dreams of something profound happening that I wasn't even sure. And that's something that I remembered as within my near-death experience, the surrounding events of it, and that we'll get into a little bit, how that is regarding trauma and the ability to recall. But, as a child, I had a lot of memories on a past life that I lived. The past life that I lived was something that I saw within my near-death experience, but the same scene of myself, ending my own life, was in a way kind of haunting. And why I say haunting, as it just had a difficult time for myself to integrate in this lifetime, and that was so much on the surface. And it was all kind of blended in parallels where time, this body, in this space, kind of went out the door, and it was just one. And so I would say, nothing bad regarding repercussions or anything like that, quite contrary, but just that same exact scene that was later validated by an intuitive who, this was before I became public, was able to pick up on that last lifetime instantaneously when I sat down on the chair in the reading. So I would say that, but I was also blown away of the life between life, situation, and being able to remember this constant dream of just taking off from the other side and planning and charting my life. And so a lot of this would come within dream state as well as, just kind of more relaxed state. And I was born in kind of like an athlete. And so when I was running around, I would get all these flashing imagery, that was beyond this lifetime. And, this existed. And I was just, at the time, it's not like I say, okay, this is a past life. This is, the charting period. But later on in life, I was able to get the verbiage and lexicon to be able to express it to others a little bit more. But at the time, it was more of a nuisance where I was just trying to integrate, and I had all these, kind of obstructive memories and experiences that I wasn't able to express and label as such.
Mm. So in the brief descriptions in the book makes it sound like you were sort of a hyperactive child. And I was wondering, does hyperactivity result, do you think, from past life experiences in some children?
I think in a way, like I was affected on such a profound basis, from the trauma that I had more so with the near-death experience. I think a lot of people, get into the kind of glorified version of it and just the euphoric elements of the NDE. And while that is truly there within my experience and others, death is not something that I fear, but dying, at least to me, was scary. And, by dying, I was suffocated and I lost, my breath, hence the title Life After Breath. And so that experience, that unresolved trauma, I think threw me off from, anywhere from anxiety to, just a lot of, kind of repressed, kind of emotions that manifested itself as anger. And I think the ADHD and ADD kind of stuff and difficulty sitting in my classroom, happened because my brain was really impacted by my NDE, thus the filter between consciousness. And so my ability to be in my body in this lifetime was very kind of off-kiltered and off-based. And so I had a very hard time just, being on the conveyor belt. I was always kind of rebellious of it from being taken off of, this kind of programming that society was trying to do to myself and, other children as seeing us as just this blank canvases with nothing to us and seeing the body as synonymous with who we are. And that couldn't be further from the truth.
Right. So you were on a playground at 3 years old at the top of a slide ladder when you stopped breathing and blacked out. And it was perhaps whooping cough that brought this on?
Yeah, the clinical term we use is pertussis, but yes, whooping cough caused me to suffocate. And if you look at whooping cough, it could be quite fatal to infants, children, and even, in some rare cases, adults too, if left untreated. And it's highly contagious, upper respiratory, virus that I caught. And a couple of days later, my brother caught it too, although he didn't have the same degree of symptoms. But, the whooping cough caused me to suffocate.
Mm. So, and then you fell, but you didn't fall off the ladder. You fell down the slide. So yeah. You weren't injured by the fall.
No. In fact, after suffocating, and I speak about this in my near-death experience, there was, my body wasn't functioning, but literally I felt my two guides, manipulate kind of the physical reality, and they pushed my body down the slide and they went down with me. And, as we know, spirit is able to just interfere with physical, kind of objects and stuff like that. And I was no different. So I literally had no functioning within my body, and my guides were able, within that moment to push me down the slide. And where I was kind of irresponsive to the people that I went to with the park that day, I could see them, I could hear them, but they could see me, but they couldn't hear me when I was trying to communicate to them, through, my own consciousness that was outside of my body.
Right. Now, the stages of what you saw in your NDE were really amazing. First, you were in space, and then flying fast down a dark tunnel. Is that right?
Well, in a sense that I was aware of this vortex kind of vacuum taking my soul on a wild ride, out of this realm to the other side. And it was quite familiar. And this vortex was something that I kind of ignored within the car, but it just was almost like this soul vacuum that took me in, sucked me into like this dark tunnel. And I was able to enter the light where, at the time I, really encountered best description that I could have as an awareness of the divine or God or the all that ever is and ever was, with a lot of other different mystical beings there, on the other side.
You say in the book that there was a golden palace on the back of your head. Right, so describe that to us.
It was to the right side of my head. My brain literally shut down, and once I suffocated it, I literally heard a snap in half in this large crack, as if you take a plug out of a wall and just yank it out. And so once my brain, snapped in half and cracked open, that's when God literally came in, and that figure of speech happened to me literally. And there's so many literal examples of, my near-death experience or allegorical references that we could hopefully get into that, actually happened, which almost makes it unbelievable in a way, but believable too. But yes, this palace was something that was so profound for myself when I was able to look at the right side of kind of my head. Its lights, its colors, its sounds was everything antithetical and diametrically opposite to anything of this planet. It was, we're used to having a limitation with how high we could soar, how good we could feel, or what love is. And there's almost kind of a cap of the climax of this human experience. I think we're bio-neurochemical, people. And so we just, at a certain point, we have a bit of a cap. And when you're out of the body and you cross over to the other side and you encounter, God, and you see God in different ways on the other side, I don't believe that God is unidimensional. It comes to us within our own basic level of understanding. But in that moment was my closest interpretation and interaction with what I would best describe in our language and vernacular as God.
Mm. Well, you call it God's house, the I am. I was trying to envision how it would, size-wise, because a 3-year-old's head is so small and a palace is so large. And then I thought maybe the yarmulke, maybe it was sort of positioned like that for you as coming out of the Jewish tradition.
No, it's funny, and I share this universal principle. Within my NDE, there was very little that I carried over, from, my life and my worldview and its interpretation of what I experienced on the other side. The only little thing that I carried over was just my concern, not to self-aggrandizing, but my concern for my parents when I was crossed over. But I guess within Jewish tradition, there are certainly definite angels within the Bible. That was something, but not something that I was reared as a 3-year-old. There was very little that I was reared as a 3-year-old, but definitely certainly wasn't, these things that I saw. And so, I think spirituality, when we encounter all these experiences, it's a little to do with what we've been taught, in earth terms, but more regarding to what's internally inside of us, on the other side as the door opens of eternity.
Mm. And you say there was an incredible force coming out of the domain of God that was the essence of creation, and every thought, deed, and action was connected to that force. I mean, that's a powerful image.
Yeah, it wasn't quite going to the Hall of Records, like as people describe. I could only tell it for my own experience, but it was as if there was, the best way I could describe it was eternal, unlimited awareness, and we're used to limitations because we go through life processing life through our linear mind and our linear lens. And so even when I speak here today, we could hear the word eternity, and even the infinite is finite because we're processing it through a finite layer. But when you get into the deeper eyes of your soul, which is eternal, and you're able to feel and sense and experience, these principles, it becomes a lot more able to be understood on a deeper level. But it was the most climactical experience that I had, at least in this lifetime. And it's not to knock any other experiences, but this was literally out of this world. But at the same time, it was here too. And, when I crossed over to the other side, it was unlimited as to how high I could go. But elements of the other side was right in front of me, including, a sea of angels that was surrounding my body, which was irresponsive to, the calls from people that I went to in the park that day. And so, I don't pretend to have a full monopolization of understanding of God or the other side. What I could tell you is it's virtually unlimited. There's no beginning, no middle, no end. It's just all. That's the best way I could describe it.
And I think you said you felt like you were home in that.
Oh, yes, most definitely. And, the allegory of it is just so strong where we think of ourselves as, children in God's playground. And, in a way, this literally happened to me in a playground where I began to re-examine myself as again, just a child playing in God's playground. And that's something that can never leave me, that playground, that place of home. And later in life, I once was displaced from my home as I was being like a jerk, whatever. And my parents just asked me to just, for a couple of days leave. And I got quite distraught. And I just walked around and not even thinking of it. I just sat down around the corner within the playground. And then again, that same playground and that imagery, was so strong to me. And I think for viewers to just remind ourselves how we're all just going through this life, but we can never leave the eternal, kingdom and playground of God. We're all just children here, hopefully trying to uplift each other and being our brothers and sisters, keepers on this lifetime.
Yes. You mentioned angelic figures, and in the book you talk about a beautiful choir. What did that look like and sound like?
So my body was on the ground surrounded by, the participants who went with me at the park, but I had a form, it was almost kind of like a soul foam that was to the side of my body. I couldn't exactly see myself, but I could feel, kind of like the shadow of my form and my just presence, and so there was a form that I had that I was aware of. It wasn't just, I was just this empty space. And so when I was in my form, I was able to look at the angels that were literally in front of me. And it was as if you just literally just take a dial from this reality and just turn it up a little bit to a higher frequency and a higher filter. The angels they're up there in these lofty places, like I expressed within, my book, but, and that happened in my NDE, but they're also right in this reality. They're right here. And so when I looked at the angels, it was different than my spiritual guides in a sense that the spiritual guides were a lot more micro-focused on myself. The angels that I saw were just, again, this brown and gold color that kept on coming to me. And they were literally right in front of me. And I could hear them, see them, but they were just looking straight. They were just like, they're almost kind of like this robot angel kind of mechanism without any individual separate identity. They were all just uniformal. But they were uniformal in unison with the love that they were sharing to the planet, to the situation, to all. And so I think they were just so uniformal in a sense that they weren't separate from love, but rather love itself. And there was no, kind of identity to separate itself from that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So the separate manifestations of a continuity.
Right. And so when we have an identity, sometimes we could size up things to get us a little bit of weight because we have free will and we have, perceptions and stuff like that. Angels just are love manifested through wings, at the core. That's just who and what I experience as they were.
Now, you mentioned something else that surprised me. You said you had a wonderful knowing of Jesus, that you didn't see him, but you felt him. How did it differentiate from the other aspects of love that gave him a name?
I think we're all we take different physical forms and physical shapes, and others know it as that way, but we're all just kind of like different consciousness. And the more that we kind of evolve, the higher our own vibration, a higher our own consciousness becomes, to be more reflective of the love of the eternity that we were birthed from. But in a way that was, when I was with Christ, I think there's an external portrayal of him and how people perceive and see him, but there's an internal knowingness that person to person has, of that particular consciousness. And, when I was with that, it was, I can't speak for how others perceive Christ, and the way that he looked and all that stuff. But to me, at least, this was deeper in a sense that it didn't have like an individual form to it, but it was just this all encompassing, just deeply, mystical and just almost indescribable high octave of the other side. And so it was in that, again, this euphoric, climactical, unlimited energy was being experienced with, feeling of protection, feeling of knowingness of every thought, of every deed, of, every action. I was quite transparent, and I was, just enveloped in this eternal love, which was much different and much obviously, opposite to, no matter who we come from and how good our parents or our teachers are, we're not used to unlimited, unconditional love with not what we do, but rather who we are, at our core.
Yes. Yeah. And then you said you could span the entire Earth from a transcendent space and time. Tell us about that.
I was able to see the planet from a micro and macro perspective, in a sense that I was able to see a lot of events that I would live, in my lifetime, and that went past this lifetime and even past lifetimes. The other side, there's kind of like this parallel universe or overlay of the Earth where you're able to travel, without, needing to go through TSA or an airplane. You're able to go, through all these places, and they have elements of the planet, but they're just more intensified, so it was just almost kind of like this parallel universe or this higher octave. And the other side, I think, has different dimensions. And, as you become more evolved and in your understanding, you're able to vibrate and really be with the higher realms of the light realms, which have less of the physical form, but they're just more light and more pure love, and they don't have as much of the human stuff. But I think, people on the other side are constantly learning, growing, and just, going into different realms on it, as it's virtually unlimited. But I was able to have a cognition and an understanding of a thought energy of a reawakening of the planet, and, individuals really coming back to this understanding, of truth, and, just kind of remembering this stuff. And that's kind of what I saw, in a sense that I saw different lifetimes, but I also saw the life that I lived, and I saw connective karmic ties, particularly within my own past lifetime. But I saw the life that I was going to be teaching as a teacher for, people who are ready to bring in, this higher consciousness of the hereafter into the here now. And so that the two realms, could have a gossamer thin or non-existent separation between the two of them. We could literally bring heaven down to earth, as we are heaven, down to earth. That's what we are. We just have to remember that.
So without time being a factor, you could see, for instance, you mentioned seeing the lost Atlantis, and one thing, and the future, your own future self, going in the other direction. And then later on, you mentioned having premonitions about the destruction of the Twin Towers in New York. Do you think that was product of the NDE?
Absolutely. As a kid, you don't walk around saying you're psychic because you don't have the vernacular for that. But my premonitional understanding was that it was very much of a nuisance. I was trying to just, kind of just push this beach ball under the water between my NDE and between my premonitions that I was having. In a way, I just wanted to fit in with other people. But, constantly I would see something and then it would happen a couple minutes later. And I was just like, what's the point of like being here when I'm seeing all these things happening? But, a couple months, a short while before the Twin Towers came in, we literally parked our car in front of it. And this is documented in my book. And I just had this intense, deep feeling. And then when you just kind of see it happen, you just kick yourself for like, in a sense that you're frustrated that you see these things, you don't do anything about it. You don't tell anyone. So it's almost kind of like we have this reality, but, and then there's this other dial that's happening, of the sacred silence where you're able to have a lot more of an understanding where there is no time or anything like that. And you're able to tap into future events that just kind of come to you with this doorway opening up and the doorway, of these events coming to you, of your awareness while you're looking at, the present as we see it. All these events are coming, at least came to me differently, but definitely having my brain, just kind of like snap in half. I just clearly understood the brain is the filter between the two worlds. And, once that happened, my ability to integrate, higher consciousness and intuitive capabilities through my brain, was a lot stronger, as it wasn't as blocked. It was a lot more of an open filter from my near-death experience.
Mm. You also mentioned that you saw your soul family. Tell us about that.
Yeah, when I was able to see them, I, knew them instantaneously, and I just had an awareness that this was just this group energy, this team energy that you would incarnate and reincarnate with different lifetimes. But it was all just kind of like a similar expression or array of God. And, one thing that people speak about in soul families is just in a way of, what I experienced was just almost kind of this enmeshment where it was just almost kind of like one energy that you were individuated, but not really. You were just part of this, team and this mission. But I felt quite ashamed and quite embarrassed when I saw a lot of beings on the other side. And that wasn't their judgment of myself, but in a way, I just almost felt that I was, before, in between lives, I was giving all these promises and I was saying that I was going to do all these things. And then, a couple years later, I'm back with them. It's almost as if you're about to go to the military and have all this crazy party and everyone goes crazy. And then all of a sudden, a couple weeks later, you say, no, not for me. I'm coming back. And so, I in a way, I just felt kind of embarrassed or a bit of like cowardly that I, wasn't going to continue this. But that was my, judgment of myself. But a funny story regarding Soul Family was, and I speak about this, I believe, in my book, was I had an aunt who was one of my mentors, and before she died, she kept on telling me the word picture. And I was like, why are you telling me this? And as she was going, she says, when you look at a family picture, people might look a little bit different. But if you look at the energy of the eyes of each particular each particular family member, there's something very profound, that connects them. And I thought that's pretty cool, whatever. And then, about a year or two later, a short while later, I was in a reading and, the medium picked up on her energy and she goes, why is she telling me the word picture, picture, picture? And so in a sense that gave me the message of what Soul Family was about, was this undeniable connectivity and just this expression and similar theme, of like karmic duty that people have. And they have different roles and different titles and they might incarnate at different times, but it's all a part of a similar expression of the divine or the ray of God, so to speak.
Wow. We only have a couple minutes left, and you said yes to your future life in this. I guess was it to your guides? And I was hoping that you could tell us what you're doing now, and also whether you feel like you're following through on that. Yes.
Yeah, a lot of near-death experiencers. I think there's one or two roads. You're either told you must go back. For my case, I was given the option, and I kind of had a let's make a deal where I asked if I were to stay in this lifetime, what would happen. I was able to see, a different series of events in my life as a teacher and a healer and speaking in front of people. And I just felt in unison with this one energy of bringing this higher energy, this higher consciousness and healing into people. And as beautiful as the other side is, this was a unique window that I just could not say no to. And it had more beauty, than anything that I saw in heaven. As I think when you bring down, the hereafter to the here now, there's nothing to me more magical about that. I think that's why we're all here in our own unique ways, is to remember that eternity in this finite reality. I never look at myself as someone who I could judge as arriving. I never will say that I completed my mission or this is my life missions. I think every day I'm trying to look at it as a different way to not discover, but to rediscover different ways of helping people and different ways of looking at life differently. I never believe in the notion of arriving, as I think when you arrive, that's almost kind of like a death to me. I think it's a continual reflection of eternity when you find and deep part of the God within ourselves, when constantly we learn how to see things differently and learn how to recreate, our lives differently. And so I think the creative force field within all of us is the closest thing to the creator within ourselves that we're forever connected to. So each and every day I look at it as an opportunity to bring a little bit more of that, eternal recollection that I had, and just finding ways to give back what I was given in moments where I looked at the most finite experience as suffocation, and I was given infinite awareness of love, of eternity. And so indirectly and directly from the ground up, that's what I try to do, within my life's work is to, allow people that breath of life, from the eternal breath that we were given, when that's taken from us at times in different struggles and trials and tribulations.
Yes. Wow. Well, Jake, we're out of time, but please tell the listeners how they can find your website and how they can get a copy of your book.
Yeah, so anyone who's interested in hearing more about, my near-death experience and subsequent other transformative experiences included in Life After Breath, you could look at it at Amazon.com. It's on Amazon.com, and you could also look at my website at jacoblcooper.com if you would prefer to purchase it from another, source. And if you look at my website at jacoblcooper.com, you'll also see the Facebook icon. And there, actually, this upcoming Monday, I'm giving a Facebook Live, as I do usually the last Monday of each month. I have a different topic of higher consciousness. This topic is really about finding ways to integrate your sacred eternal story, to provide everyday grace. And so I always say not to be defined by a story, but to define the story. And I think that's all of our jobs, here on this earth. And so you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and if you're interested in any other, private services, you could also contact me there as well as email.
Wow. Well, Jacob, thank you for sharing your fascinating story. I hope people will get your book because I found it very, very interesting. As far as we got in it, perhaps we could have you back sometime to talk about your work as a hypnotherapist, going back into past lives. I find that a very interesting topic as well.
My honor. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If listeners would like to hear the show again or any of our nearly 400 past shows, go to NDE Radio and hit the past shows button. And for more information about IANDS, go to their website at iands.org. And listen again next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, for more NDE Radio. This is Lee Witting saying thanks for listening.